In my last trimester, I fell down the stairs and ended up on bed rest. I immediately was aware that I wasn't myself. And so when I asked my OB about it, she was like, oh, we've got something for that. And so she wanted to prescribe antidepressants. I, smiled, took the paper, went to my car and cried for half an hour.
Welcome to She Handled It, a podcast dedicated to sharing empowering stories of women who have faced major adversity and how they overcame it. I'm your host, Arwen Becker. I'm a wife, mom, national speaker, author, entrepreneur, and athlete. But on my journey to these triumphs, I've battled many life-altering challenges. Thankfully, I found freedom when I realized I was not alone. I invite you to join me each week as I explore the inspirational stories of determined women who overcame life's toughest moments. Ultimately, how she handled it, and so can you. I think I was in 7th grade when my sister told me that I had a fat stomach. And I internalized that negative comment. And it turned into a 3-year journey where every single night I did 3 sets of 30 sit-ups. I marked it on this little chart I had created in my room. And if I missed a night, I would double up the next night. And if I missed 2 nights, I would triple up if I needed to. And the good thing was that created core strength within me that I've been able to maintain throughout all my athletics and throughout my life. So I found myself in this ridiculous, peacock strutting comparison conversation with a few other men that were in this coaching group that I was in. And they were all kind of hitting my stomach and they were like, ooh, ah. And yet I had a coach that was standing there and he completely looked unamused. And he looked at me and he said, I'm not impressed. I don't know what you're hiding under all of that. But when you finally tap into whatever it is that you're walling up and trying to protect and become vulnerable, that's when you'll be unstoppable. And I was kind of shocked that somebody talked to me that way because I was used to people telling me great things about me and certainly not publicly calling out my insecurities. But it was actually a turning point in my life because I believed what he was saying was correct and that I was trying to mask a lot of hurts and mistakes and insecurities that I had with this hard outer shell. And that was actually making me weaker as a leader, not stronger. My guest today has made a career guiding leaders using their darkest and most difficult emotions, and to do it so they show up powerfully. Yet she does it in a way that's not through sheer force and brute strength. It's through reassuring confidence and grace. And that is what truly drew me to her. So who is this stunning Cordelia Gaffar? Cordelia is the emotions opener transformation strategist. So far in 2020, Cordelia has been inducted into the Global Library of Female Authors by Ona Miller, and her book related to her Replenish Me Process will be released later this year. She is also Best Podcast Host of 2019 for her Free to Be podcast and the ACHI Magazine Volunteer of the Year, and finalist for Top Influencer and Orator of the Year. She is a best-selling co-author of America's Leading Ladies Who Positively Impact the World with Oprah and several dynamic women. Cordelia currently is studying to become a TIB practitioner and a coach in the Harlem Wellness Network. She is now also the official sponsor of She Phoenix, Femme Phoenix Limited in South Africa, to advocating for the girl child, teenage girls, young women's rights to a better education, health, and life. Cordelia, I'm so excited and happy to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Arwen. I'm so excited to be on here with you. And it's your light that drew me to you, just for the record.
No. Well, it's your color that drew me to you. You're helping to get me out of my just wearing black mode. So you had talked a little bit about how leaders use these darkest moments, and they use them and really in a way in which we can show up powerfully. So why don't you take us back a little bit to yours? What was going on at that point in your life?
Of course. So once upon a time, about 18 years ago, I was working as I believe I was the controller at that time, and for a small company. And I had had 2 miscarriages. We already had a child who was 2. And, I didn't really talk about the miscarriages. And I went ahead and, we have to try to have 2 kids, right? Mm-hmm. 2.5 kids, the suburban house and all the things. And so I had to do that by 30. And so I pushed my body. And in my last trimester, I fell down the stairs and ended up on bed rest. Oh. And then after my baby was born, I immediately was aware that I wasn't myself. And so when I went for my 6-week checkup and asked my OB about it, she was like, "Oh, you know what? We've got something for that." And so she wanted to prescribe antidepressants, and I nursed my children, so that was a no-no for me. And so I, smiled, took the paper, went to my car and cried for half an hour. And then I said, "Okay, you know how to do this. You know your body better than any doctor. So what are you going to do?" And so I just poured myself into studying about nutrition and fitness and all the things to reduce stress and more mindfulness, more spiritual practices and all the things. And just wanting to unload the weight of my emotions and get back to who I really am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was my darkest moment.
Yeah, certainly. And so what was it that made you, it's funny because you say the 2 kids by 30, and my husband goes, "Why didn't you tell me that you had already made that list?" Because it's like, I'm having my first kid by 30, my second kid by 32, they're going to be 2 years apart,
Yeah.
Thing. And then putting all that pressure that it's got to be that way. But what was it for you that you started sensing personally where you knew that something wasn't right? I mean, what was going on in your life or within your mind or your body that was giving you this feeling that I need to go and talk to somebody about this?
It was pretty obvious. I mean, with my daughter, I only gained 25 pounds. With my son, I gained 65, right? Like with my daughter, I looked her in the eyes and it was love at first sight. With my son, I was just like, I know I'm looking at a baby, but for some reason, I don't feel any connection.
Were there feelings of guilt and other feelings that were starting to spin out of that and confusion because of it?
I was completely confused, and I definitely felt guilty. I felt guilty for having miscarriages. I felt like a failure for having miscarriages. And I didn't even realize like the weight of all that and not processing the grief of losing those children. Like I didn't allow myself to focus on the loss of those children, right?
Yeah.
And all the things were really piling on. And then there was no one really to talk to because, both of my parents passed before I even got married. So it's not like I can go and call up my mom or anything like that. And you know how families are a little strange after death. So I didn't really have a really close relationship with my sisters at that time either. So the only person that I was really talking to was my sister-in-law, and we didn't have a quick bond, let's just say. So yeah, I didn't have any immediate support.
Right. And then so going into the doctor, was it pretty quick that they were saying this is the medication that's going to help solve your problems? There weren't any discussions of really much outside of that?
Nope. Yeah, she was just like more than happy. I mean, if you saw the smile on her face when she gave me that piece of paper, I just want to know what kind of kickback that meant. So, like she wasn't like, here's the name of a counselor. None of those things. Yeah. I was like, so how much is that like 10 grand, 5 grand? I just wondering.
Right. It's interesting because you remind me when I knew that there was something with my middle son because I have 3 boys. I remember finally going, okay, well, we need to talk to somebody because this is affecting him in school. And at this point, he's going into first grade. And it's interesting because I have one of those same type of memories of going in and talking to a panel of counselors and teachers at the public school. And I'm not kidding you, within 5 minutes, she pulled out a piece of paper. She drew what looked like a nerve synapsis. And she said, this is why he needs to be on medication. And as a mother, I was devastated because it was that same feeling like, seriously? You haven't even asked me any other questions. You haven't talked about his diet. We haven't talked about what the living arrangements at home are like. We haven't talked about different ways of studying. We're just going straight to medication. And I just remember how angry that made me because I just was thinking, wait a second, this is not the default. It doesn't mean that, because in the end, it took us almost 3 years to get there. He did end up going on a medication, but I wanted to, at least as a mother, know that I had explored working with an occupational therapist, looking at his diet and how we could do that. What kind of things as a teacher could we accommodate and make some changes that might be better for what it is that he needed? But it made me feel kind of like dirty. I was like, really? That's how quickly we're going there? And so I commend you for leaving there, taking that little slip of paper, probably crumpling it up and throwing it in the trash and starting to find other ways. So, I mean, here you were, now you were facing still the reality of it. You knew that there was something that was not right that needed to be dealt with. But now you actually started taking the initiative and diving into researching what those things are. So where in the world did you even start?
Yeah, the internet was working back then. This is like
That's helpful.
Right. So, what had happened, I believe it was like the week before something, just in browsing, I had seen some research that they were doing in France to deal with depression, just regular depression with nutrition. So I kind of started with that. And what I actually found out specific to postpartum depression is that if you have a boy child, right, the testosterone that the mother's body has to create during pregnancy, if you're not getting enough niacin, which is B3 in your diet, then you're more prone to have a hormonal drain and will instantly propel you into postpartum depression. Wow. And so now back in those days, they were telling you, like, if your baby's 6 weeks old, that's called baby blues. That's crap. You can know the difference between baby blues and especially since I had that accumulated grief in my body already. And so, so that's what came up for me. And so then I was like, I was like already studying and practicing herbs, right? Herbal medicine.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to then find out, okay, so what does that mean for what kind of infusions do I need to be drinking and stuff like that. And then that research led me to some like mindfulness things and then different moving meditations. So I had just become Muslim, I think the year before. And so I also wanted to check and see if there was anything in Islam that, might be able to help me. So apparently there's like, as far as modalities, I found out about, Pilates was great. But also eccentrics is really great because the whole purpose of that is to reconnect that conversation between your nervous system and your muscles. And it's the grief is in your muscle memory. So practicing eccentrics and doing Pilates on the off days just for mobility and flex, and strengthening, that seemed to help my brain function. And then, the different foods, I wanted to find more about that. So in the Islamic tradition, there's actually something called tib, and it's unani tib, which is the ancient blend of Greek medicine, Chinese traditional medicine, and Ayurveda. And so according to your body type, you eat a certain way. Also, I found something called tasawwuf, which is, we know it just generally as Sufism, but it's the emotional wellness piece of spirituality that connects the rest of the story. So that's what I was up to. And in 9 months, what people saw was a joyful Cordelia and a very slender Cordelia.
Wow.
So, and I wasn't focusing. Yeah, I was overweight, but I wasn't like, oh my God, I'm no longer a size 4. I was like,
Sure.
oh my God, I'm crazy.
That ended up being a little more obvious than the other part. Yeah. It became a little bit more of a focus. So would you say, did you start biting one of these pieces off at a time? Because when you hear that, you were hitting it not only in the physical realm, in the spiritual realm, what you were eating, and all of these pieces together, did you find that you were kind of working through one piece first, or did you just dive headlong in? I'm going to hit all of these things as hard and as quickly as I can to try and get some relief.
So let me invite you to think of it differently. I'm all about harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a Muslim, we already pray 5 times a day. As a mom of 2 little bitty kids, how much time do you have to exercise?
Mm-hmm.
0.
Right.
So after my prayer, I would do 1 or 2 movements, right? And as far as food goes, I made sure that I always had a really good balanced breakfast to start my day. That's something that my dad had raised us. You have to, your nutrition is super important. So I just replaced the foods I was eating with the better foods, right? So I had to eat breakfast. I just ate a different breakfast.
Right.
I stopped buying the stuff that didn't work in my body. And also for the opposite, so the morning and the late night prayer, when the kids were sleeping, I would spend more time on the mindfulness practices and the spiritual practices. And then also as the kids got older, you want your kids to calm down with you. So I would practice, I would say the little prayers and do the little mindfulness techniques with them, right?
Yeah.
So then you don't have a discipline problem either because they're already seeing how to self-soothe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so brilliant. I just love that. And I just love the fact, because you have how many kids now?
6.
Oh, 6 kids. Okay. So we've got 4 more added to the group at this point. And so for you to be able to find those ways to take care of yourself in the midst of all the other personalities that are going on around you, what would you say have been some of the biggest takeaways that you've had in those experiences with having 6 children, being a woman who is coaching and writing and, has so many things pulling her one way and the other, but still being able to carve out that self-care time, which I think especially this is why it means so much to me to really talk to women who have overcome things, because we as women often will find ourselves doing for everybody else, and then there's nothing left to give to ourselves. And so how in the midst of all of the what I would call excuses that a lot of people can use of I've got all these kids and a job and people to serve and things to do, how do you still make sure that you're making time for yourself?
So again, I invite you to embrace harmony. And this is, I always say it's because of my kids that I have my business and I do all the things that I get to do. And I name my program Replenish Me because if I look around, that's what I do, and several times a day. So for example, right? So I'm the emotions opener transformation strategist. That actually came from, I quit my job after I found out I was pregnant with my 3rd and decided to homeschool them as I was building their curriculums, because back in those days, they didn't have box curriculums and they didn't have virtual school and all that. Mm-hmm. So you had to actually go and find books. I found out that the best way to structure a curriculum is according to the child's learning style. And in that, to understand the different learning styles, the best way for children to hold on to the information you're presenting is to make sure that they had emotional well-being. And how do you do that? Well, that kind of kicked me back to my depression studies and how to overcome that, right? So I learned a lot about emotional wellness and, how to create an environment of compassion and self-forgiveness and peace and joy and love of life and curiosity. And that's the way I raise my kids. That's the way I educate my kids. And that is now my coaching program all these years later. That's
I love that. That's so good. I have to imagine, though, that there have been times along the way, as I think of some women who might be listening going, well, then, what about me? I mean, how am I, what's my excuses? She can do this with 6 kids and, feeling like they're not doing enough. I mean, what would you say to that mom who maybe right now her life is feeling a little bit out of control or maybe a lot of it out of control? Where do you even start? I mean, what's a good place to say, okay, start at this point? Or, what would you say to her who's just feeling like everything around her is just chaos?
So release the need to do everything that's expected and accepted. Like the list we were talking about, having to have X number of kids and live in what house and your kids have to do whatever. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You have to do whatever Arwen wants to do, right? And whatever Arwen makes Arwen happy. You come from a place of self-compassion, and whatever is inside of you will radiate out into your household and beyond. And the other side of that, right? So when we're releasing what's expected and accepted, we have to reassess what our values are, not the values of your mom and dad, not the values of your church or your society or, community. What is it? What are your values? And you take those top 3 and then you create habits that will honor those values. And that's the place to start. That's, you're starting with a clean slate and, these are my values. This is what's going to support those. And once you are clear on that and you're supporting yourself in that way, then you look around and say, okay, so who is on my team? Yeah. Like, do I have girlfriends that will support that? Oh, you know what? She's got to go. And he's got to go, and, or, there's someone that's been here all the time cheering for me. How come I never gave them so much time in my life? Right. And so pull that person in and, and then that will, creating this environment for yourself with the support will allow you to rebirth.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you're totally right. I mean, we always have to, at times in our lives, reassess the people that we do have around us. So when you look back at this journey that you've been on and, starting from the beginning, recognizing that there was something significant that was going on with this postpartum depression and the pathway that it took you on, when you look back now, quite a number of years later, did you say 18 years ago or how long?
Yeah, he'll be 18 in December. Yeah.
Okay.
So wow.
Yeah. So when you look back, what would you say would be those 2 or 3 real key takeaways that you would say, this is what I really learned in that process and that helped me get through this?
I would say the main thing was I wasn't judging myself. I was really seeking to approach the whole process from a place of concern and compassion, like nurturing for myself. Like if I were my mother, how would I take care of myself? And then I was more focused on not so much the doing of the things to take care of myself, but the being with taking care of myself, right? Because a lot of times we're just like, okay, now I've got to do yoga. Now I've got to do this. I wasn't like that. I was just, as you heard, right? I was like, okay, what's going to support me right now? And I would really just feel into being with the best thing to support me in the moment. And then the last thing is, right, ultimately it was for the love of my children. I wanted them to see an emotionally stable, loving mother. And if they didn't see me nurturing myself, then of course by default I couldn't nurture them. And I always wanted to be very compassionate and loving and present for my kids. So that's what I would say is just, run away from the crowd. And I know everyone talks about self-love, but compassion, I feel like, is the embodiment of love. And then I'm not ticking boxes with my self-care.
Right.
I'm setting the barometer of my self-care. It's like, what does my body actually need?
Yeah. I just love that. And just like you said, your kids, when they see you doing that, you're also giving them a roadmap on how they'll be able to do it for themselves. It's not just them seeing you take care of you. It's that you're giving them the tools. They're being able to see how, when I'm facing these situations and I'm, going through that as a teenager, going into young adulthood, they'll have skills that they learn just in watching how you cared for you. And there's such a freedom that comes in that space where you're not living up to, like what you said, other people's expectations of who you should be or what you should be doing at this moment, because we all come to that moment in time through a different pathway. And what we see of somebody else, that's only a fraction of the story that's brought them there. And all of us need to be able to walk that out in our own lives in our own unique way. So I think that's just beautiful. So final 3 questions. What would you say, of course, me being a person who works with, especially with women in finance, what would be the best piece of financial advice that you have been given?
I would say financial advice that I've been given is surrounding generational wealth, creating generational wealth. Your kids may beg you to leave home at 18, but encourage them to stay home until they've stepped into what it is they're doing with their life. I mean, within reason, right? I'm not saying have your kids stay home till they're 40, but just so that you can support them in how to create financial stability and have a better understanding on how to, to not start from zero.
Or less than zero.
Or less than zero.
No, that's very good. What about a book that you would recommend and why? Any great books you're reading right now? Maybe it's one of yours, that you think that somebody would love to dive into.
One of my books. I have to be honest. I do think that my book, Work Out Around My Day, The Only Health Guide That Moms Need, is really an awesome resource because it hits everything. It's like a really nice quick guide of herbs, food, recipes, how to schedule your day, and some really great self-nurturing tips.
And what's the name of it again?
Work Out Around My Day.
Work Out Around My Day. Okay.
Which you can find on CordeliaGaffar.com.
There you go. So I'll have to pick that one up. And then what would you say is a favorite quote of yours? What's one that you love to live by?
Okay, so I just found actually a new quote. I love Eartha Kitt, but I think I love Josephine Baker more than Eartha Kitt. So this is a Josephine Baker quote. "You are on the eve of a complete victory. You can't go wrong. The world is behind you."
Woo-hoo-hoo. I love it. Yay. That's awesome. I love it. So, how can people get a hold of Beautiful You? Social media, any of the websites that they could go to, anything else that you would recommend that they tap into of yours?
Right. So as I mentioned, my website is CordeliaGaffar.com, which is CordeliaGaffar, F like Frank. .com, and that is like a one-stop shop. You can find my YouTube channel, my podcast, my books, my programs, my online events, and eventually my retreat. But right now I'm just doing virtual retreats. If you need a supportive community to hang out, I have a Facebook group called Replenish Me Group. And you'll know it's me because in parentheses, it has my name. And then I'm, everywhere on social media, just under my name. Like I said, even my YouTube channel is under my name. And then, of course, if you just want a quick guide to start somewhere with nutrition to replenish and boost your immune system, you can go to bit.ly/R, replenish, and B, boost.
Perfect. Well, you have been such a joy to me. And I've heard multiple people say, because you and we didn't meet that long ago, and I've been on a couple of different panels, and you provide just a feeling of peace and grace, and it just permeates throughout who you are, and it comes all the way over to everybody that you talk with. So you have provided that for me today, and it's just been my absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arwen. I always love hearing that, and I do hear it often, but every time it's like the first time.
And that's the way it should be. Thanks for spending time with me on the She Handled It podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe so future interviews are automatically downloaded directly to your device. And if you want access to the show notes, including links to all the resources mentioned, visit lifewitharwen.com/podcast. Thanks again for joining me. Now charge forth, because if she handled it, so can you.